It was an experience, even though we weren't part of that in that tornado. It was something that I just never forgot.
And had it been a few seconds more, we would have been sucked out. We really would have been.
The date was June the 9th, the year 1953. And the city, with its more than 200,000 people and surrounding Worcester County, were ending a normal day. It was late afternoon, but up in the North County, a tragedy was brewing. It couldn't happen, but it did. A tornado born to rip a path of death through central Massachusetts, and the city and the towns began to count their dead. And the toll went to 85, then even higher.
What I remember vividly about that day was that it was a very hot day. It was so hot and the air was so still that it seemed very strange, you know?
We were going to have a picnic outside. The chicken was in the oven and everything else. And all of a sudden it started to pour rain like you wouldn't believe.
I was at home getting ready to go to do my 6 to 9 duty at Memorial Hospital. And the sun was out, but all of a sudden it got dark and the hailstones were very, very large.
The weather looked very threatening, but I didn't know. I just figured it was just a thunderstorm.
We were out playing at a neighbor's house that was like practically right across the street. They had little kids, and I was one of 5, and we just played at each other's houses. And it came so fast that she made us go in her house. I mean, we couldn't even walk one house up.
It had struck what is now they call Great Brook Valley. At that time, the apartments there were for veterans.
And we eventually went in and had an apartment, occupied an apartment there on Tacoma Street. It was a building that was 3 stories high. And we had a top floor apartment. I had 4 children, and one that was only about 2 months old at the time, and the oldest one was barely 5. We were ready to sit down for a meal, and then all of a sudden, this horrible sound came coming through. It was like a train. That's what it sounded like. And my husband said, "It's a tornado." I don't know how he knew that, but I didn't have a clue.
So we went in the parlor in Great Brook Valley. We had a parlor that had a big picture window, and then you had a little place that you could, under the staircase. We went under the staircase, and if we hadn't been under the staircase, we wouldn't be alive today.
There was ambulances, there was trucks. They were carrying people on doors using as stretchers.
And we were huddled in the hallway. And what happened after that, all hell broke loose. And we were in this hallway and everything was going past us. The windows were blown in, and I couldn't help but noticing the living room. I had a rug on the floor, and it went up like the shape of a tent, like it was ready to go out. And what happened was I could look up in the ceiling, and I actually saw the sky. There was no roof, and this was a steel frame building. The roof was blown out. And what we saw was horrific because it was mud, glass, and a lot of fiberglass too. And I don't know really where it all came from, but there was a lot of fiberglass around. The windows were blown out. My curtains were out the window. And I happened to look across the street in a newly built home. It was like little toothpicks. It was all kind of all this way, but everything was just in pieces, and the people were killed in that home. We were fortunate. We survived.
400 nurses answered the call. There was suffering at Great Brook Valley and Curtis Apartments. The children, nowhere to go, gathered in groups. and here the long walk out of the shattered housing projects. The little ones dazed and clinging to their parents.
I wasn't an experienced nurse, but my normal duty was going around helping, taking the people's temperature, their pulse and so on. But when I arrived there, I was told to help bring the people into the emergency room or other parts they set up as emergency rooms. A lot of people were covered with blood. We wiped up their faces. Some of them, their eyes were all swollen from the sand and the dirt. So it was things that I never did before, but everyone tried to pitch in and help.
I got hit with glass up on my forehead, and I was bleeding and didn't know it until a Salvation Army person told me about it, and I had to go to the nurse. And I was pregnant with my third child, and they were so afraid that I was going to have something happen, but I was all right, and the kids were all right.
This young girl, the refrigerator door blew off and blew towards her, and she lost both her legs. A very, very young girl. There was a lot of very, very sad stories that went around after it happened.
You know, we were young kids. You wouldn't, in those days, speak out of turn, ask anybody anything. So we just kind of trudged on all the way up to Cozy Corner. I don't know if you know where that is. It's up by Great Brook Valley. And we asked somebody finally, what happened? And they said, the poor farmhouse roof blew off. And so we went home and told my mother that the roof on the poor farm blew off, and that's really all we knew. When just a few steps further down was where Great Brook Valley was and where the devastation was and all those apartment buildings.
My husband was so level-headed, and I think it's because of everything that he went into in his service, because he was 5 years active duty, and he said to me, he says, you'll have to go downstairs with the children. He says, go down in the cellar. He says, I have to go out. He says, because that bus that's out there, I've got to see what's going on. As it turns out, the bus that he would have been in, he got a ride home that day, fortunately. The people were killed.
My mother said we couldn't stay with her because she couldn't stand children. So we went up to the Red Cross to see if we could get something. We owned a piece of land because we were going to build. And this woman said she had a little trailer that we could put up there, but there'd be no electricity.
My father, who was a physician in Worcester at the time, called my mother and told her what had happened and that he wouldn't be home forever probably. But later on in that evening, the winds blew up again. He called again and said there were warnings again. So we went downstairs. We had a root cellar. And my mother, my brothers and sisters, and my poor grandmother was, an old little lady, had to come down and sit in the root cellar with us.
We all went out, and the ground was full of all kinds of wire, street wire, things that were dangerous to walk on. We got out of there and we went to my mother-in-law's home. And we stayed there for about, I'd say, approximately 2 or 3 weeks. And now, this was a Lincolnwood. It was at the corner of Lincoln Street and Plantation Street. They had there, at that time, trailers set up.
That night, one night at 8:30 at night, it was dark, and this man come knocking at my door, and he said I had given a lot of blankets to the Red Cross so they could wrap people with. And they said, he came and he gave me the blankets back because he said they were all washed and everything. And he saw where I was and he said, how come you're here and you ain't got one of those trailers? I said, I don't know. They said I was all right here. So he went down, and that same night, I had my 2 children, and he drove us over there and got us a trailer.
And then what we did was we went back to Tacoma Street to the apartment. They had the military there, and they came in, and what they did, the National Guard, to protect the place. And then of course they had people trying to clean the apartment up and make them as normal as possible. They had a lot of work to do there because, like I say, the roof was blown out. But they managed to do all this, and we went back.
And here, another job for the National Guard. Not only did they protect the property of the stricken people, but they also lent a hand in salvaging such items as this furnace, pulled out of a rubble-filled cellar, a furnace which might one day be used again.
But there were a lot of people who were so emotional about the whole situation, they didn't want to go back. But we did go back, and we stayed there a few more years, and then eventually bought our own home.
So when we got in the trailer, and from there I went back to Great Brook Valley. They rebuilt. So when I got there, Mr. O'Connor was the manager of the place, and I went to him and I said to him, I want to get out of here. Well, in 6 months I had enough money to buy, went out and I bought a house, and that's where I lived after that.
I would say myself personally, it's one of the worst experiences of my life.